You ready?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. It's great to have you back again. Tonight, we're getting into the fall nights, and the nights are getting longer and longer. Days are getting shorter, except for where we're going tonight. Down there, it's all opposite because we're going down to where the people stand on their heads all the time. We're going down to Australia, where Roger's going to entertain us with some tales about going out and taking pictures at night. So I'm going to share my screen and get the standard announcements out of the way because some of these things are getting pretty important now. First off, with TAIC shots. Arno has been doing a good job. What did you say, Arno? We're up to 54, I think it is.
We're at 54, yes.
Yeah, we've got 54 nebula have come in. And we have up until October 31st to get them in. So that's still plenty of time, 2 weeks. And so get them in, take pictures of your favorite nebula, submit them at 1080 on one side. Look, we know you appreciate sending higher resolution and deeper color resolution, all that other stuff. It's going to be made into a movie, and it's only going to be so big. So tell us maybe a little bit about what you did, what kind of stuff you want, all that other stuff. But we really don't need any bigger pictures than about 1080 pixels on a side. You can send in a movie if you happen to have a movie of a nebula, but generally it's just single pictures. You just click there to submit the file. It goes to your email system, and off it goes to Arno, who does all the work. And Arno, thank you for doing that work. You're a volunteer, and you're what makes the Astro Imaging channel works. I mean, you're one of the many people who make it work. So thank you very much, Arno.
It's a pleasure.
Okay. Also, we've got a wonderful volunteer named Rory. Rory's been busting his butt. He's been collecting data. Now his deadline is coming up. That's today. Get it in like right quick. Okay. Or maybe tomorrow. I don't know how organized Rory really is, but he's got at least 4 or 5 people that are coming in to present how they got data out of the stuff that Eric submitted to us. Now that stuff is going to remain on our website. As a matter of fact, if you go to our workshop area of the website, you'll find several of these workshops that you can get the data and you can process the data. Anyway, we've got that show. Rory, you're out there still, I think. November 12th or something like that. You guys are going to have the presentation?
I believe it's November 21st.
November 21st. Okay, thanks. I get numbers back. Never mind. So he's going to have the presenters here, and they're going to say a little bit about what they really got out of the data and working on it. And Eric will be here too. So there's a link to the data files there. There's where you can find it. Now, I always like to tell you a little bit about what's coming up. And next week, Dave Doctor will be here to tell us about high-resolution astrophotography for the imager, how you can do it, things like that in your backyard. And then 2 weeks from tonight, we'll be at Halloween. Do not disturb me on Halloween night. I am already disturbed enough. Then Deborah Saravallo is coming back. She does wonderful work. She's an artist as well as knowing her stuff technically, but she's an artist, and she's going to talk about, what's the real color of those emission nebula. And then we've got some other people coming up, but as you know, on December 12th, we will have the Astro Imaging crew, basically Larry Groom and me, went to the Okie-Tex Star Party, and we took a bunch of videos, and we'll have at least one show showing you what people brought to the Okie-Tex Star Party to show off. And then we've got an open meaning we haven't figured out who's going to speak there. And as you go on, we've got several open days after the holidays. We need you to volunteer for that, and to volunteer to be part of the Astro Imaging channel. Just hit the contact button and tell us who you are, what you'd like to talk about. We'll get back to you and tell you a few things you need to know about how to talk what to say, all those kinds of things like that, and we'll get back to you. We want to encourage you to make your comments over here. Remember, this is your Astro Imaging Club. For many of you, it's a way to contact people and say, hey, how's the weather? And Ray says, hey, Jerry, hey, Mike, hi, everything else like that. So, it's a friendly place. Be part of it. Make your comments over here. But you can also use this over here to like things. We really appreciate that. If you've never subscribed to the Astro Imaging channel, and 12,000 of you out there somehow, 11.7 have subscribed, we'd like to make that 35,000. Nah, we'd like to have you here every week if you can get here. And one way to get that to happen is have you subscribe so that you can get a notice that you got a show coming up, things like that. You can also contribute someplace around there. I think if you hit that button, it'll contribute. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is that you ask your questions over here. Roger, the presenter tonight, has made it a point to say that he would much prefer you were all there in his living room with them, which would have been kind of strange, I think, considering they're still in lockdown down there in Australia, because he likes the interaction. So he likes people saying stuff. He likes people making comments. And I think he'd rather have him talking than me. So why don't I just get back over here, stop sharing my screen, and invite Roger to start sharing his, and say what it is that you need to say, Roger.
Sure. Thank you very much, Alex. I shall share my screen. There's that. Let me know when that comes up for you.
You're showing good.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Alex. Good to be here. As Alex has alluded to, I'm in my office here, and I'm much more used to doing these kind of presentations and so on in a room full of people. I'll maybe make a mention of COVID later on, but thank you very much to the Astro Imaging channel for having me. It's good to be here. I chose to do this little prezzo on Nightscapes in Western Australia. Couple of reasons. One, while Nightscapes wasn't the first type of astrophotography I did, it is the one which I do most at the moment for a few reasons, which will become obvious. And the other is, I thought, well, being a global channel on YouTube, I thought, well, why not show off something of WA, which is a little bit different to maybe what you would sort of see in your normal shows. So what I'm going to do for you now, if that'll move on, there we go, is just go through these basic things. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about, explain a little bit of who I am, give you some context there and a bit of my story and journey in astrophotography, and then a bit about Western Australia, where I live. I've grown up and still live here. Then, even though, well, I expect it's basic stuff to a lot of people watching this show, but some technicals of just Nightscapes, how the people in my workshops do Nightscapes, how I do Nightscapes, and so that technical side of it, and then just talk through a few different regions in Western Australia where I've been to take astrophotography and talk through those shots. So yeah, as Alex mentioned, I'm usually have the workshops I run are very interactive and become as much a friendly discussion as a presentation. So keen to, if there's any questions throughout, to have that conversation with people. So that's me, my ugly mugshot. Much better behind the camera, but you can see a few logos there. AOLWA is one of my businesses. Astro Observatories WA for hosting telescopes here. Astrophotography Australia is my astrophotography and workshop business. I've been a member of ASWA, the Astronomical Society of WA, for 23 years, I think now. Astronomy WA is a local collaboration between astronomy parties in WA, which I'm a member of. And then Perth Observatory, I do a lot of volunteering and collaboration with Perth Observatory. So a little bit about where I started off, I suppose. I was always interested in astronomy as a kid, and 1997-ish, first year of university out of high school, my dad wanted me to get into a hobby, and I got to choose, and he bought me this telescope, a wonderful, wobbly, dodgy tracking, typical first telescope, 4.5-inch Newtonian. I wanted and got the highest power eyepiece and all the rest of it. So while it was dodgy, it was a great learning experience. An example of the learning experience, you can see the lines I painted on the ground there on my parents' disused tennis court. They were meant to be where the tripod legs were, but it turned out that I didn't understand north, south, east, west accurately enough and got that completely wrong. So all sorts of learnings there, and you can tell the age by the little laptop there, which is an old Toshiba thing with a 7-inch screen. But that telescope, within a few months, I realized, well, I'm looking at all this stuff, but I got nothing to show for it. So how about I try taking a photo? And I had a Pentax SP1000 film camera, and I shoved that in the eyepiece draw tube and started taking shots. Of course, they were awful, as you would expect. But after adapting the motor with Lego and elastic bands and gaffer tape and all the rest of it, and a lot of work, I ended up getting a lot more into astrophotography. Pretty quickly decided that telescope was not big enough, so instead of buying a car, I bought my second telescope. And pretty quickly after I bought that telescope and got my brother to help me carry it out to the tennis court every night, he was sick of doing that, and him and my dad collaborated to, or conspired to get me kick-started on building an observatory so that he didn't have to do that. And so I built an observatory in the backyard there. You can see you can see the Pentax SP1000 film camera on the back there, but I got into all sorts of things. There's even a quick cam webcam there, which I was talking to someone about the other night for planetary imaging. It takes me back to the days of webcam planetary astrophotography, which was good fun. And that's the observatory which I built there and since moved to where I live now. I've done a whole bunch of other stuff over the time, and it's been an interesting journey, and a lot of that has been portable astrophotography, and I guess that's where Nightscapes ended up starting. This is the typical portable kit, which I used to take around more than I do now. This Losmandy GM8 and the William Optics 90mm Apo on the back there, refractor on the back there. That's actually, you'll see it's got a funny tube on the end. It's got a solar filter on there because that was during the transit of Venus, which we got to see here. I happened to be 1 week off between jobs, and managed to travel to where it was clear, which was lucky because most of Australia was clouded out, at least Western Australia. So yeah, that was down Esperance Way, down on the south coast here, and photographing the transit of Venus. So just finishing off, I guess, my journey. So I've sort of come from the wobbly starter scope, as a lot of people do, and then done a bunch of deep sky and planetary photography and this out in the field stuff. And I did end up upgrading the mount and so on, as you do. It's always an endless thing. And that's pretty much how my telescope sits these days, although no longer in that observatory. But at Paramount, still using my 12-inch OTA until I can justify the price of something nicer and more modern, and the refractor on the back of that. I guess in terms of astrophotography, the stuff which I've always enjoyed most, other than Nightscapes, which is good for the human element of interaction with people doing Nightscapes and with relating the landscape to the night sky, Other than that stuff, it's been galaxies and planetary nebulas, which are my favorite. And so that's what I've mainly used that gear for, doing all sorts of things like supernova searching and so on. I do work a lot with the local organisations here. So the Perth Observatory, so the Perth Observatory is the historic observatory which has operated in Perth since 1896. And I actually grew up just around the corner from it in the hills. And in 2010, I joined the volunteer group there. In 2015, I became the chairperson of the volunteer group, and it was then that the government decided to shut down the government operations there. They looked for someone to either run it or to mothball it, and we, of course, the volunteers, were not going to let any sort of shutting down of it happen. So we took it on, and I sort of instigated that process with the volunteer group, and they now continue that very well. And that Perth Observatory has gone from strength to strength really since 2015. We've made a lot of improvements, a lot of enhancements, and it's going really well with public outreach and involvement in the community. And finally, or second last one on about what I do workshops now, and that's why I'm doing this on Nightscapes, because I've sort of fallen into this as much as anything. I was doing all sorts of astrophotography, and then someone asked me to do a workshop. A local camera shop asked me to do a workshop on Nightscapes, and I thought, why not? And it's sort of just snowballed since then. And so my life has become very much about Nightscapes, even though it wasn't really deliberate. And so I run a lot of workshops, and last week I had 3 workshops. This is all around my day job. My day job is software engineering, and I've actually taken today off my day job so that I can do this preso for you, because it's the morning here. Yeah, around that is my astrophotography workshops, which I do Perth Observatory and other places. And I guess another place which I do workshops is at my dark sky site. So my wife and I bought a property out in the central wheat belt here, and we're slowly building it out and revegetating it as well with native environment. And I have an observatory there where I host other people's telescopes, and that's where my telescopes move to now, from my backyard observatory here. So yeah, that's just a little bit about what I am, I suppose, and where I've got to. I guess you can maybe get a sense of I'm a bit of a jack of all trades for astrophotography now, having sort of been through everything from deep sky to planetary to comet hunting to supernova searching to photometry work for people to the nightscapes and all sorts. And I guess it's that which makes the workshops fun. I can sort of help people out with a diverse range of stuff. So a little bit about Western Australia, I suppose, because I guess we get the sense often in Australia and WA that not necessarily everyone appreciates where we are or what it's like here. Incidentally, the shot which I've got behind these cover slides is me standing there under these trees at our block in the central wheat belt. And typical southern sky, you've got the Large Magellanic Cloud and the Small Magellanic Cloud, the southern part of the Milky Way, the Pointers and the Southern Cross down here, and a meteor, which was kind enough to glance through at that point. So Western Australia, this is probably typical for what you might think of Western Australia. There's a lot of coastline, there's a lot of beaches, a lot of coastal scenery, which makes it a very nice place for traveling for landscape photography as much as anything. And I guess that is partly why Nightscapes is so popular here, because there really is such a diversity of landscapes to start with that, you know, you can't help but try putting the night sky together with that. So where that red bit on the left of WA, of Australia, that's WA. It's a big place. It's like roughly 10 times the size of the UK and 3 times the size of Texas. Apparently we're the most isolated city, and I guess a lot of the time it does feel that way. A little bit less so these days with half decent internet. The internet has always been notoriously poor in Australia, but it's getting better. But we have a fairly, we've got this large landmass, but relatively small population here, that 2.6-ish million people, and most of that is down here in Perth, down in the southwest corner. A lot of WA is really just open land mining, a lot of mining all throughout WA. It's funny, I remember hearing some international prime minister, I've forgotten which, in Asia or Middle East, saying that Australia's got all this land and all these lakes, because it shows all these lakes and things and so on Google and so on, but they should have more people. And then if you actually look at it, it's mostly desert and it's mostly salt lakes, so not very hospitable in most of WA. It's coming into summer here. The Milky Way is setting in the west, so Orion's rising in the east, and that means we're coming into summer, and it starts to get pretty hot if you're not anywhere near the coast. This is what it feels like in reality most of the time, especially if you go back 10 years to when the internet, or even 15 years when the internet was a lot less than what it is. You ask about astrophotography in WA and you go, okay, who does astrophotography? Well, there's 2 people in that club that do it, and maybe 10 in that club, and well, that's about it, and in terms of getting help and advice from people, it was sort of like, well, chat to the people who are on the forums. It's sort of often does feel like we're a long way from everywhere else, which is good for light pollution. So this is WA, this is Australia on the light pollution site, and that pin is roughly where I am in the middle of the light pollution there. But that I guess to give you some perspective, the transit of Venus shot, I was down over at Esperance, down over here, which is sort of an 8-hour drive from Perth, so 8 hours at 110-ish k per hour. It's a vast place, and you can see there's not a lot in the middle of it, but most of these light domes here will be either towns or mines. Up around the Pilbara, you have a lot of mining, so it can be quite tricky to get away from the mining sites in terms of light pollution for nightscapes. But that is what we have. In WA, I just wanted to mention this organisation. I suppose it's a company which Carol Redford, a local in the astronomy industry, runs, and it's something which I think the rest of the world could take a bit of a learning from in terms of astrophotography, tourism, and dark sky management. Carol started up this Astrotourism WA organisation a couple of years ago, and it's just about engaging the regional towns in astronomy tourism, and she does that in a way that she also works with them to reduce their light pollution and to sort of shape their street lighting and so on to a better way of thinking, a more efficient and better for the skies. And it has really been really good for us people who do nightscapes in Western Australia, because we now have this organisation which has these links with these regional towns. These regional towns set aside dedicated places where they openly invite you to come and do astronomy viewing or astrophotography. And it means that instead of sort of going, oh, I want to go out and do astrophotography, but where can I go? I don't want to just stop on the side of the road or near some farmer's paddock who might get upset with me or whatever. It means instead of that, you have these places which are, you know, are safe, and you know that you're welcome, and you can look up the accommodation and these kind of things. And I think it's fantastic. I'm surprised it isn't something which someone has done elsewhere that I know of, but I think it is a really good idea and has worked well for Nightscapes in Western Australia. And that's sort of an example there, that you can see that for each town there's a info, and you click through that to a map, and it shows you the different viewing sites and astronomy interest sites in that town. Like it might be a old ruin of a church or something that is one of their top 3 kind of recommended spots for nightscapes and so on. So yeah, I reckon it's been a really good addition for nightscapes in Western Australia having that. Final thing on WA before we move on to more interesting things maybe is COVID, just because it came up and I knew it would. So we are in an interesting situation here in West Australia that we're basically the government shut the borders when COVID came around. Excuse me. And that's caused a lot of problems for people trying to come in or out of Australia and Western Australia. But it's meant that we basically are in this bubble here where we have no COVID. We occasionally get scares of truck drivers from over east, or of ships coming to port with COVID and how that's managed and so on. We've had 2 lockdowns, I think it is. The first one was a few months, but then the second one was just a few weeks. But yeah, it's interesting. So in WA, we travel and holiday and do everything really like we have always. But we're coming to an interesting time when Australia is opening up, and it's going to be very interesting to see how WA manages that, because people have become very accustomed to not having COVID here. Vaccination rates are slowly getting up, but how will that proceed? Nobody knows. So from here, I'll move on to, I guess, talk a little bit about the technical side of what Nightscapes is. I hope that I'm not just talking boring information to you, because I don't know, as a channel which does, you know, spectroscopy and deep sky imaging and all the rest of it, Nightscapes is not rocket science. So it's also got a heck of a lot easier in recent times. You know, once upon a time, it was quite challenging. You know, my first Nightscape was using my Losmandy GM8 with the camera piggybacked on the back, doing 3-minute exposures with a guide camera, because, you know, this was early dish SLR days. Like my Canon 300D had a whole computer and all the rest of it. So that was hard work. But, you know, technology moves and marches on. So I suppose just to go through the basic questions which people usually ask in my workshops about Nightscapes, and like I say, hopefully not too boring for you, but usually people are very concerned about what camera they should use for astrophotography. And to be honest, that's as I was alluding to, that really has become not such an issue. Obviously, you can't use your deep sky astro imaging camera unless you work out a way to adapt a lens to it, but then it's a lot of work. But other than that, if you've got a digital SLR or a mirrorless, which was produced since about 2012 and has live view, then as long as it's with you, it's a good one to use. And I'm all for advocating you should consider what's suitable to you, not necessarily what is most technically perfect. People fuss far too much with something like Nightscapes on the technical nuances, and thinking that the answer is you need the best camera or the perfect lens or whatever. And in reality, it's got to be a camera which you enjoy using and which you enjoy carrying around with you, and which is going to be there with you when you happen to want to take a Nightscape. and that doesn't break your back because it's too heavy to lug around, and or isn't too hard, and you can use it in the dark. It's always funny when I have people come to my workshops, and they from the Nightscapes, most workshops we get them to tell us what cameras they have when they book, and you go, oh, okay, they've got a Canon, let's say 700D or something. That's fine. It's a little bit old, but that'll be fine. And so you're prepared for that. And then they turn up and they say, oh, hey Roger, oh, I didn't bring my 700D. I managed to borrow Canon R5 from someone, or insert high level camera here, and so I've got that. And you're like, oh no, they don't know where any of the buttons are. They're going to be using this in the dark. And sure enough, they end up wasting not the whole night, but a lot of the night, trying to work out how to use the camera because they're not familiar with it, because the buttons are in different places, or it's hard to use, or it's so please just use any camera that is familiar to you, and that is a mirrorless or digitalist modern, and enjoy the time out there more than fussing about the gear. Obviously, there's perfect camera, not perfect, there's no perfect camera, but there's better cameras for this, but a heck of a lot of people are still using Canon 6Ds and 5D Mark IVs and the Nikon D850As and A10As and the Nikon D750, and the Sony Alphas 3s, they're all great cameras, there's no doubt about that, and they're sort of, they're better ones to use for it. But I get to see a lot of nice Nightscapes from older cameras as well. So the next question which people often have is around, of course, the lens. And for Nightscapes, we really are talking wide and fast. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that changes, actually, because I imagine that as sensor technology continues to evolve, I guess the wide is going to potentially become maybe a little bit less critical. But you typically team up. So if you typically have wide lenses which are fast, you don't get a fast telephoto, and that's going to be too small and too small of field of view, too slow. But most of the Nightscapes, we're talking 12mm lenses, 15mm lenses, 14, typical Samyang 14. Actually, I think over in the US it's called Rockinon, same brand, different name. So 14mm f2.8, very common. I actually started and did my first, 7 years or something in Nightscapes with just the lens I had, which was a Canon 17-40 f4. And f4 is slow, but heck, it worked, and people still buy those prints. Again, you put time into these things, then you can sort of, like with the camera, you work with what you've got and you can get results from that. The fast bit just means that you can do shorter exposure times, and you can get more data in your astrophoto before you get trailing, and that just simplifies your life a heck of a lot, because if you have to start do tracking, so if you have to go over exposure times of, say, let's say 30 seconds or something, typical for a wide angle, if you've got to do tracking and do 60-second exposures, then all of a sudden you've got to do something with the foreground potentially, as in you're going to have either trailed stars or trailed foreground at that kind of exposure time. So it gets a lot harder. So if you can keep the lens fast, meaning like f1.4, 1.8, f2, 2.8, then you can save yourself a heck of a lot of work and get more bang for your buck. You can get more data for your time. So that's the main thing there. I do enjoy doing some Nightscapes with 27 and 50mm, and I think that's going to be, it'd be interesting to see if we could, get if there was a nice fast 50mm that came out which didn't have horrific coma and horrific chromatic aberration as most of all the nifty 50s and so on, which I've tried, then I think there's a lot of potential there for different nightscapes. But at the moment, you end up having to stop those lenses down so much to get rid of the artifacts that it just doesn't work for nightscapes. The ones which I use, and I should have actually said that the cameras which I use as well. At the moment I've got a Canon 6D and I've got a Fuji X-T30, and those are my two main cameras. The Fuji is always with me, and the Canon is in my big bag of workshop and nightscape gear. So often the Fuji comes out because it happens to be small enough to be in my bag with me. In terms of lenses, Samyang 24mm f1.4 for the Canon, and the Samyang 12mm f2.0 for the Fuji. They're my typical workhorses. And lens-wise for the Canon, I also use the Tamron 15-30 a lot. That lens is probably the most perfect I've seen for astrophotography. Zero coma, wide open, and just perfect. There's nothing wrong with it, really. I guess the only problem with it is it's heavy. It's like nearly 1 kilo in weight. It's the biggest lens I have, I think. We've got camera, we've got lens. Next thing people want to know, how do I stop the stars trailing? And of course, as astrophotographers, we know that you need some sort of a tracking mount, or you do star trails. And a lot of people in my workshops are interested in doing star trails. My problem with star trails is I can never leave my camera sitting there long enough to do it. I want to be using my cameras for other stuff. So all the star trail shots which I've done are mostly using my older cameras, like my 7D and my wife's 550D and stuff, which I just don't use anymore, and so I can leave sitting there on a tripod. But my main cameras I want to be actually using too much. So you need to allow yourself time for star trails. That's my big problem with it. So we do in Nightscapes use trackers quite a bit now. The most popular one here in Western Australia, and I'm not sure if it's the case overseas or not, is the Skywatcher Star Adventurer. That's very popular here. Mainly because it's accessible. You can buy it off the shelf in Western Australia, which for the most remote city in the world is pretty amazing. And you can get it from other places around over East as well, which is only a few days shipping away. But other than that, probably the Vixen Polaris, second most popular. I've also got an Ioptron Sky Tracker and a Astro Track, and I use those for my workshops. But to be honest, probably 2/3 of the people in my workshops don't use trackers and aren't interested in it. Nightscapes is about engaging the public in astrophotography and astronomy as much as it is anything else. It's usually these days an entry point. It's an entry point for people to appreciate the night sky, and from that they may then go into other avenues of astronomy, but they may just develop an appreciation for the night sky, and that's of benefit to us as astronomers and astrophotographers as well. And so those people, they don't usually want to fuss with the geeky technicalities that we do in astrophotography. They just want to be able to plonk their camera down on a tripod and take some shots of what they see and they experience in the night sky. And for those people doing my workshops, it's just about making the most of that fixed tripod scenario. So even tracking is often too much fuss for those people. How am I going for time there? Got quite a bit left. That's good. Next question people often have is how to focus. That is a very easy answer if you have live view. Unless you have a Sony, then you first have to work out how to access live view, put it on a button on your camera, then it's easy. Always come across that with the Sony Alphas. But providing you have live view, so you've got a camera which is sort of 2012 onwards, which is why there's that kind of date range on my condition of cameras, then zooming in digitally on your live view is easy. Now, the first problem which people have when they come along to my Nightscapes with older cameras is they get out there in the practical bit and they turn on their live view and they go, Roger, I can't see a single star. How am I meant to focus on anything? And that's legit. Like, they've probably got there with, let's say, the 700D, an older camera, so an older sensor. They've probably got the stock lens, which is an f3.5, and they're not seeing any stars. So take a shot. You just take a 5-second exposure. 5 seconds is as long as you need to get something even out of focus stars, and it's not so long that you get bored. So you take a 5-second shot and you see where these out of focus stars are, and then you got a clue, and you got a clue as to how out of focus you are. You can tweak the focus a bit at that point to put it more towards infinity, take another 5-second shot. Once you can actually see a vaguely in focus star in that 5-second shot, you know where to digitally zoom into on that live view. Once you know where to digitally zoom into on the live view, then you can always find that star there. But you won't see it when you're showing 20 megapixels on a tiny little screen on the back. You need to digitally zoom in on that to 100% in the live view, because at scaled down to the screen on the back, the star gets sampled out by the resizing algorithm on the camera, because it's just this tiny spot. Whereas if you know where to digitally zoom in, then you can go to that point in the screen and voila, there you go, you see the star, and you can rack the focus. How to focus on stars and the foreground? Another classic question. And to be honest, I like keeping it simple in so much as using wide lenses where, you know, with my 12mm f2, anything that's about 3 meters out from me is almost going to be in perfect focus. And certainly if it's a tree which is 10 meters away, if you're focused on the stars, then that tree is going to be sharp just by virtue of the optics. And so that makes it easy. If you're forced to have something close to you and out of focus, or if the focal ratio or the focal length mean that you just have out of focus elements in the foreground, then in reality it's layering in things like Photoshop and so on. It's extremely rare that I would stop down my aperture for the sake of focus depth of field for Nightscapes. So I guess that ends up being a bit of a catch for the people who just want to use Nightscapes as a way to appreciate the night sky and not get too involved in the technicalities of astrophotography as we know it. And to them, using Photoshop for layering is often a step too far. They might have Photoshop, but they don't know how to do that, and more likely they don't have Photoshop and they're not interested in paying, what is it, $15 Australian a month for having the privilege of having Photoshop. So, and then learning how to do that. So in the end, I think for a lot of people it comes down to compromising, and that makes it more accessible. It makes the Nightscape not too scary for these people to get involved and be able to have that appreciation with the night sky. And so that's using your wide angle lenses and keeping yourself back from the foreground a little bit, so it's in the same focus as the stars. So how long should I expose for? For Nightscapes, most of the stuff which I'm dealing with in workshops is 10 to 30 seconds, because again, people like that simplicity, and it's about getting what you can out of that time frame. You can always stack 10-second shots. There's nothing wrong with that. You're going to obviously not have quite the same result as if you stack longer exposures, but it works, and you get a nice Nightscape. And where Nightscapes is about what looks good. A lot of my exposures 1 minute. I tend to find that on a tracker, well separated from the foreground, 1 minute, 3 of them, maybe 1 or 3 for the foreground is an easy answer. I'm very busy. I have my day job and 2 other businesses and family, and for me, if I start taking too longer sequences and having to spend longer out in the field, then the processing also on those longer sequences gets more complicated, because of course the foreground would be moving at a different rate or stationary compared to the stars, so everything gets a little bit harder. So I tend to find that a good golden rule for me is 3 times 1 minute, and then usually 1 for the foreground, which is just with the tracker turned off. But it's what works for people. I do 2 minutes on my ultra portable trackers, not infrequently, and 3 minutes is not unheard of either. I mean, you're talking, if you're wanting to do sort of, the Magellanic Clouds, just rather than a nightscape, just wanting to do sort of photo of the large Magellanic Cloud, you might do a 2-minute exposure, and they typically work quite well with the ultra portable trackers because the tolerances are quite good there. How many exposures? That's, for me, it's that 3 shots, and I always tell my people in the workshops, don't just take 1, because often the people in the workshops are people who are coming at this from a photography background, not an astronomy background, not an astrophotography background, and so they're used to just taking, they sort of see the perfect shot, take a shot and go, oh, that's great, and then walk away. Whereas what they really need to do is take at least 3, maybe 5, because you might throw away 2 because of satellites. I would say airplanes, but we don't have so many airplanes here these days because of the whole COVID scenario and the borders being locked, which is fantastic for astrophotography. Used to have lots in the sky, but now it's rare to get one in your shots in the sky in WA. So do multiple, but for nightscapes, we're talking sort of the 3 or 5. If you're doing 10-second shots, so you're doing shorter exposures, which are going to have less signal, you're going to be battling noise a little bit more, then sure, I guess you would go up more to maybe 10 or 15 exposures and average those out. But then also there, of course, your overall time is still quite short. I guess a lot of the time your constraint is the overall time. You don't want that foreground to move too much if you're tracking the night sky, and you don't want the sky to move too much if you're not tracking the sky over the whole period of your exposures, which you're going to stack together. So if you can do 10 in 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes, then hey, that's still pretty good. Well, ISO, this is an interesting one. It's it always creates a lot of contention. It's a bit like bringing up religion or politics in an astronomy forum. So coming at it from the nightscapes perspective, and that ease of enjoying nightscapes and capturing what you see, I find that on balance, the higher ISO is the way to go for the people which I deal with. Now, obviously, high ISO has catches. It has the catches of reducing your dynamic range and having more noise in your image because by virtue of the image being brighter. But the benefit of it being so easy to see in the back of the camera exactly what the composition you're getting, because remembering this is nightscapes, this is as much an artistic thing as it is a science thing. It's about a composition and representing the scene how you think it should be as an artist. Then seeing that in camera on the night rather than having it faint and then brightening up later in post is really quite important, I think. And so on balance, we end up using fairly high ISOs for modern cameras around the 3200, 6400 ISO. But it is hugely dependent on a bunch of factors, mostly your temperature, as you got most of the people watching this would probably understand. I mean, we cool our astronomy cameras, and here we have dish SLRs and mirrorlesses, which we've just pulled out of a car traveling out to the central wheat belt in Western Australia when it's a 42-degree day, Celsius that is. So, you know, if you're taking nightscapes in summer here, you got to do everything you can to keep your camera cooler. You don't put it in the fridge, but you don't leave it sitting in a hot car, and you let it cool down as the evening cools down rather than keeping it hot inside and so on. So in summer, we have to really pull the ISO back. We have to pull it back a lot to 1600 or something, I find, because the amount of thermal noise in the camera is just out of control. And you notice that if you do nightscapes in June, in winter here, and it's, you know, 2 degrees at night, fantastic viewing conditions. And for whatever reason, like I broke my ankle doing nightscapes. I had like 8 weeks off, and went back out, traveled up north, and yeah, the difference after like an hour shooting, I realized, oh, hang on, Roger, think about this. There's tons of noise. Zoom in. I had it, you know, essentially still on winter settings, and I had to be down to 1600. So yeah. Like I said, it's a contentious one, and there's a million ways to skin it. But from the perspective of ease and accessibility of nightscapes, it does work out to be high ISO that you want. Where do I go for astrophotography? Not for nightscapes. See that city that is far, far away? Yes, it's over the horizon. That's a shot taken from my field in the central wheat belt where I've got my property. And yeah, nice and dark. Get as far away as you can from the light pollution, but yeah, it still has to be accessible. So that's where Astrotourism WA works well for us. Right. Well, moving on from the how-to, I'm guessing I've got no questions. I hope everyone's still awake there somewhere. I'll move on to my last section, which is talking you through a series of nightscape locations and photos in Western Australia. And the first one, which I'll go to, is just locally here around Perth. So Perth is the city in Western Australia where I live, and I live in the hills east of Perth. I'm still in the metro area. It takes me, for example, about 45 minutes to drive to my day job towards the city. So a lot of these shots are from in the hills here. This is up at the Perth Observatory in the hills here, where I'm often there volunteering to run tour nights, which is our main income at the observatory, to keep the doors open. But often on those nights, I can, well, not often, but occasionally, when I'm not running around like headless chicken, trying to keep things running, I can whip out my little Fuji, and this shot is with the Fuji because that's the one that I can quickly, I just have in my backpack along with my iPad and other stuff which I need for hosting the public tours. And I plonk it down on a little Leo Photo mini tripod, which I also always have with me, and get shots like this. So this is just a simple 30-second shot with my 12mm f2.0 on the Fuji. Got a bit of color in the sky from a faint moon which was behind me, and of course we're somewhat near the city, so about 30 k's out from the city, I guess. I think that black and white is underdone in nightscapes, and also portrait and different angles. People get fixated on the central core of the Milky Way and getting like that rainbow arc of the Milky Way and so on. And there's so much opportunity there still for really artistic angles on nightscapes. And this is one which I feel turned out a little bit more like that. This is the steps that you see going up there is the steps of the Lowell Dome at Perth Observatory. So there's actually a dome up on top of that, and there's 69 steps that goes up. And the situation here was that the Milky Way here is in the west, and this was when it was setting, sort of after the Milky Way season, and so it's looking towards the Perth, where the hills and the observatory are in the east, and so here we're looking towards Perth, towards the light pollution. And when I looked at this shot in post-processing, I saw all the horrible orange yellow light pollution that was down here, and thought, and tried to get rid of that in a few ways, but then I switched it to black and white and thought, what, it just doesn't need the color. You've got this fantastic clear detail and so on in the railings of the observatory building there, and the Milky Way just comes out so nicely. And so this is basically just the only processing I did on this was single shot, which was using the 27mm f2.8 pancake lens on my little Fuji XE2 actually. Was to convert it to black and white. I haven't tried to bring out the Milky Way any more than that, but because you don't get distracted by the horrible yellow color of the light pollution or have the artifacts of trying to remove that, works pretty well, I think. That's sort of a different angle. Oh, yeah.
Roger?
Yeah.
There was one question here from actually a fellow from Western Australia, Anik Chan. Did you talk about bug protection when you're out at your remote site? And do you have any kind of shelter there?
Yeah, so it's funny, bug protection. Yeah, this is Australia. We have deadly spiders. Whenever we go out there, there's a different plague of something, whether it's flies, mosquitoes, soldier beetles. It's amazing. There was this beautiful orange soldier beetle, which was just attracted to the white observatory for whatever reason. There was a month of soldier beetles all over it. So in terms of bug protection, the main problem which I have with bugs is if I am wanting to do nightscapes or portable astrophotography where I'm actually out there in it at twilight. At twilight, it's just, if you try and use a laptop screen, you get eaten alive by mosquitoes. So I personally get around that by avoiding doing that kind of astrophotography where I'm using a laptop screen and at around that time when mosquitoes and so on are worst until sort of a couple of hours after sunset. And then it's not a problem. Yeah, for that time, using the screen on the back of the camera as little as possible and avoiding things like big laptop screens and so on is the best way. Obviously, we use bug spray and stuff like that, but I find that kind of stuff annoying. So, yeah, it is a fact of life here that you got to work with the elements.
So do you have any kind of shelter out there, or you're just...
Yeah, sorry, I should elaborate on that. So we have a shed on site. That shed is our living space. It's kitted out with a modern kitchen, bedrooms, and all the rest of it. And we've got ablutions there. So when people come out for workshops, often they camp and they have access to ablutions there. So we've got full shower and toilet facilities, and then the kitchen and everything else. So we've got a nice living space there. Currently, I'm actually partway through building an extension to that, which is a large area where I'm mounting a large sort of wall screen to do inside workshops there, so that when people come out for these sort of 15 people group workshops, which I have there, the part where I'm talking to them over that twilight kind of time or just before, where it is potentially cold and they're having to sit around or there's bugs around, will actually be inside, which is kind of nice. That'll be finished in the next month or so. But yeah, so there's that shed, and then the observatory is a full building in itself, quite separate, and that's a big roll-off roof observatory where I host other people's telescopes as well as mine. Other than that, looking forward to getting more domes and so on there over time.
Just a comment about your black and white photography. I think that all us photographers or from whatever sort have often noted that a black and white photograph somehow gives you more definition. And when you put color into it, you're distracted by the color. And that's an effect that anyone who's done photography for 100 years has seen. So yes, black and white is certainly something that all us astrophotographers probably should spend more time with.
Yeah, it's funny. I often wonder if the fact that astrophotographers are typically very obsessed about getting more color and more detail and this kind of stuff stems from the fact that we've come from astronomy and deep sky, typically photography, and that kind of thing, where that is more our aim because we don't see the color. Whereas photographers coming from, say, street or portrait or landscape photography would be more likely, I would think, to sort of try out the black and white nightscapes. But it's funny, they almost get hooked on the, I've got to get more color in the Milky Way. Yeah, there's a lot of potential there.
I think that's all for now, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So continuing around Perth, this is something which I like from just near where I live, well, between here and the observatory, which is only 15 minutes away from me. Got the Milky Way here, and this was during the dead of winter. That tree in front is a deciduous poplar tree, so it had lost all its leaves, so it would have been probably June that I took this. And it's just that Milky Way straight overhead. It was actually a 3-frame panorama, but the panorama was vertical, so one frame on top of each other going up, and just so clear, and because it's just straight overhead, but a unique perspective on it. This was a fun little shoot which I had. I enjoy spending time with people doing astrophotography just for fun, and I have less opportunity to do that at the moment because I'm so busy doing workshops, and so it's very much me delivering those workshops, which is quite different to just being there with a bunch of people doing astrophotography. And so I sort of felt like I was missing that a bit, and put out a call for anyone who wanted to just go out and do some astrophotography at this location nearby, and had a guy come along. He's holding the torch there. He was actually doing his own light painting there, and I just happened to take a shot at the same time. Turned out opportunistic. A little bit of cloud coming in, and I feel like people are a little bit too paranoid about cloud, especially in nightscapes. You can go to a lot of effort organizing a workshop, and then there's a slight hint of cloud, and they're like, is it going to be too cloudy? It's like, oh, as long as it's not 70% or worse, then the cloud can kind of add something to it. And certainly in this case, the cloud has added to it by diffusing the stars a bit, like we sometimes do with filters, and that just makes them so much more obvious and retains more of their color. And so you can clearly see the Southern Cross and the pointers there, Eta Carina, Southern Pleiades, nice stretch of the Milky Way there, and the light from that is illuminating this gum tree, this Wandu tree here quite nicely. And that's just a single 30-second shot with my Fuji. So going from Perth Metro up north, up along the coast, a popular tourist town is Kalbarri. And so I've been there a lot in my life as a kid, and then later on for landscape photography. And more recently, I've done a couple of trips there with Perth Observatory, where we do community engagement trips occasionally. We take telescopes along, and we've done that up north. And I come along with my cameras and do some workshops along the way. And I do that because the communities can't necessarily pay what is needed to get the observatory there. They don't have enough funds for that, even though we're volunteering our time. And so by me coming along and running a couple of workshops, the income from that can sort of, we can just break even on our costs and get up there, which is good. So Kalbarri, people might recognize it for this kind of landscape. There's the Murchison River runs through, and there's fantastic gorges along there, and also coastal gorges as well. So that's the kind of landscape which you're looking at in that area. Very low scrub, low trees because it's low rainfall. Yeah. And so coastal gorges along there are really nice. They're all obviously facing west because we've got the Indian Ocean out to the west of us. And there's not a lot of opportunity there for sort of September, October nightscapes out over the ocean. So this was a panorama of, if I remember right, it was about 18 exposures. I think it was 9 across the top and 9 across the bottom. You can see the large Magellanic Cloud, small Magellanic Cloud, and the Milky Way in the middle. Unfortunately, a bit of glow from Kalbarri there, and this walk trail, with this paved walk trail which goes along the cliff top. So yeah, nice view. Quite technically challenging to do the panoramas in terms of investment in processing time. As long as you get enough overlap in the panoramas, then you can do that fine. You can process them okay, but it takes time to work through it and get all the color balancing right and so on, I find. That's out at the gorges. Now, the reason I took this is because they've got the statue of an emu there, and you've got upside down the emu, part of the emu in the sky, which we've got here. So there's a head of the emu, a beak of the emu, and then the neck goes down, and it broadens out to be the body under that, and that's well recognized indigenous character in the night sky. So that there. Out in those inland gorges, there's an area which is well known for tourists, which is the Nature's Window, and that's Nature's Window there. Now I'm sort of tucked down on the opposite side to where most of the public go, sort of hanging off the back of the cliff, because here the Milky Way was setting in the west. So this was another large panorama, probably 18 shots again, because I tend to find that works for me, 9 across times 2, using my 24mm Samyang. Fully open, and it was a nice cold night. It was sort of 1 or 2 degrees, and so hence 6400 ISO. Often up in Kalbarri, it's a bit warmer, so bring down the ISO a bit.
Roger, I have a question about your panoramas. So do you set this up as a mosaic, or are you just overlapping it just visually?
Just visually, yeah, because I mean, for example, to get to this spot, I've clambered down over the rocks, and I've got literally about 6 inches behind me of rock shelf before a sheer drop of probably about 20 meters. So you sort of are not in the kind of situation where you can take a lot of gear. So it's literally just my tripod and my camera on a tracker, probably. Whether I had that turned on here, I can't remember. But yeah, it's just visually overlapping, and I just make sure I overlap half of each image. That's the other side of Nature's Window. It's not a fantastic shot, but I just wanted to put that there to give you context of I was on the other side of where that is. I happened to come across this pile of rock, but part of the cliff on the coast, when I just got into my car and sort of saw it and thought, oh, there's an opportunity there. It looks a bit like a volcano. So this is a classic sort of 3 1-minute exposures for the sky and a 1-minute exposure for the foreground, and then just a bit of simple layering there. And this kind of shot's pretty simple for layering over a foreground like that, because it's quite a straight horizon that we've got there, so very easy to mask. As I mentioned earlier, I glanced over. I did break my ankle doing astrophotography one June, and after that, it healed enough, and I thought, oh, you know what, I wouldn't mind getting out there. I'll go up to Kalbarri. And my wife said, "You're what? You're going to climb around the gorges in the middle of the dark after you've just broken your ankle?" Huh? So she came with me to make sure that I didn't come to any other grief. And so that is her at 2 a.m. sitting on a bench waiting for me to do astrophotography, which is fantastic to have her along, which is very rare. But I snapped this 20-second exposure before I ran back along the path so she could go home to bed. So that's sort of the Kalbarri region. Just got two more. The wheat belt, which is a favourite of mine. It's just so accessible from Western Australia. I suppose I might actually just come back to this is very crude, but there's Perth is just here. But the wheat belt is this inland region in the southwest of WA, where it's obviously mostly broadacre farming, so wheat, barley, that kind of thing. And so out in this region, you can head straight inland, straight east from Perth, and you get away from the light pollution quickest that way because the light pollution is mostly coastal, and you get to some good dark skies. So that's a ridgeline at my property, our property in the wheat belt, and I just absolutely love the twilight hues that you get on the sort of open landscape out there. And that's also on our property there. You can see it's sort of typical landscape for out there. Perhaps a few more trees than usual in that particular shot, but we made sure that we got a place with some remnant bush and nice trees. So Cokeman Rock is a place which I used to visit and camp at a lot with astrophotographers and astronomers. A bunch of us would go out there, my friend with his 15-inch obsession and another friend with her 132 FLT. And I'd do nightscapes in the later years. So this is a panorama, just one row of exposures, 20 seconds each, and stitching those together. Freezing cold night. You know, again, it was possibly even ice on the car that night, and so nice clear skies. Can see a little bit of green there. We quite typically get a reasonable amount of air glow, green air glow in WA. Most strongest I find in February and March, but yeah, still hangs around at other times of year, intermittently. And I just put a shot down the bottom here to give you an idea of the landscape. So in the foreground is part of that black monolith rock in the middle there, and the wheat fields beyond. That's kind of the kind of place we're sitting. And around that, there's opportunities for unique nightscapes where it's not just the sort of usual arch of the Milky Way. So on the left here, we've got the Magellanic Clouds. They're often a good subject when the Milky Way is not up. They sort of are usually best at the opposite time of year, the Milky Way, and obviously the central region of the Milky Way there. Astro Camp, run by the Astronomy Society of WA, Astronomical Society of WA, is out in that area. So I drop by every so often. Used to go to them every single year, twice a year, but just got a bit busy in the recent years with my own wheat belt property. And so that's just a quick snap of, again, sort of I've just rocked up sort of late in the evening and there for a few hours and then headed back to my place. And so I didn't bring all my kit. I just had in my bag my Fuji and whipped it out. And I find that it does the job fairly well anyway. Out at my place again in the central wheat belt, I was crouched down behind that Canon 6D on the Vixen Polari. You can see they're taking shots of something to the left, and I thought, you know what, it's actually an interesting perspective with the being down so low in front of the gate there, giving that feel of the farming sort of area, and so I took a shot of the Canon like that using the Fuji. And that's a line of trees that we have there, which I often photograph. And we've got the nice Southern Cross and pointers there, and Eta Carina's Southern Milky Way going through. Quite a lot of light on the landscape and the blue in the sky, which is typical when you've got a bit of moonlight. So there's a moon to my right, sort of a bit brighter than a crescent. It was sort of a getting on towards half. But that means that yeah, you've got that nice blue. And to be honest, often it's not a bad idea to use the moon as adding that blue color to the sky. I mean, obviously it lights the foreground, which is convenient as well, but just by adding that blue to the sky, it adds another color and it adds a bit more interest potentially. And you can also find that it blends well with, strangely enough, the light pollution colors, you know, the blues and the yellows, and then you've got foreground other colors. And it's interesting to use those elements to your advantage. So that's the wheat belt. Last one is the golden outback. Somewhere I want to get a little bit more, but you know, this is the kind of scenario you're looking at. This is a salt lake called Lake Ballard. Mental blank there. There's statues in that which people often photograph. The statues are dotted around the salt lake down here. It's an art installation. But we got completely clouded out and rained out the one night we were there. Hence, I don't have an astro photo of it. But this is what the golden outback kind of looks like. Red rock, red or white salt flats, depending on whether they're salty or wet. In this case, it's all wet because it's been rained. But yeah. So out there, there's a nice series of campsites along what we call the Golden Pipeline. It's a pipeline from Perth to Kalgoorlie, a mining town. And so there's a whole heap of opportunities along there where there used to be steam trains running along that line. And so there's granite monoliths, big granite domes on the landscape where they have built in the early 1900s, late 1800s, built rock walls around those to capture water, to then take to a reservoir, to then have for the steam trains. And so you have these places which are now campsites and have these interesting foregrounds. And so on the right there, you can see the aqueduct, which takes the water from this particular granite monolith to a reservoir. But yeah, these shots, this was a cracker of a night. There was a bit of cloud around earlier on, as you can see on the left-hand shot. But that didn't really detract from it. I felt it added a nice wispy kind of mystery to the night sky, and it almost enhanced the blue kind of color which you get from having a bit of a moon up then. Obviously in the right-hand shot, the moon had set by that point. That was as I was walking back. That night, I was actually walking around in the dark, well, walking around doing twilight then nightscapes for 8.5 hours, I think it was. And it was only afterwards that probably weeks later, that I thought, you know what, I was probably pretty tired after that. My feet were sore and everything, because in reality, I didn't think about it, because you don't have the sun sort of beating down on you to make you feel like the time is passing so much. But carrying around 20 kilos worth of gear and tripod and all crouching down and doing all that for 8 hours without a break is how it often ends up, but it's good fun. But yeah, the Canon 6D, my workhorse for that kind of stuff, and the typical 1-minute exposures and keeping that lens as fast as possible. Quite recent, this year in August, going up to Carnarvon and Gascoyne Junction, which are up north and inland communities with Perth Observatory, and had a bit of moon around, and I just thought, brought out the colours in the gum trees and the night sky quite nicely there. So Southern Milky Way. And I was doing that trip with Matt Woods from the Perth Observatory, another volunteer, and he's also employed to do our tour administration. So he was there with me, taking some shots of the Milky Way, which was straight over our heads. This shot on the right, you can see, is got Jupiter and Saturn, and the Milky Way there is pretty much straight over the top of us. So very wide angle view there. So that's about me. About it for me. That's at Carnarvon on that same trip, taking shot of the ATC dish there, which was used for the Apollo missions, and got a good tour of that. But yeah, so that's I think that's about it for me. I think that's my last shot. And a bit like the workshops, often you get to the end of the night and everyone's got some good shots and feeling a bit worn out, and then the cloud rolls in. So the cloud's rolling in on the right here, and that just closes out the night, and that's it, home time. So yeah, thanks very much for having me. I hope that's of interest to someone. I mean, as I said, it's a pretty basic topic for what us astrophotographers often deal with, but it is one which is a good way to engage your community and help them appreciate the night sky, to help with things like light pollution and so on. So,
thank you, Roger. We certainly appreciate you taking us on a tour of Western Australia and the Western Australian night skies. They're really pretty. I'm really impressed with those 18 panel mosaics. How much overlap was there from one mosaic to the next, one panel of the mosaic to the next?
Yeah, half. Yeah.
Half?
Yeah. I don't do less than half, because otherwise, depending on the part of the area, just not enough stars to.
Okay. I would think with the wide angle lens, you'd almost have some distortion problems at the edges on the panels, but
most of them I'm doing with my 24, which is, in the scheme of things, not so wide.
Okay, on a full frame 6D. Okay. How are we doing on other questions there, Eric? Any other questions come in?
Well, one of them just came up from another one of your Western Australia buds. See, sorry to ask so many questions. Any nightcap pics with the wave rock? I think the international audience here would like to see that. Somebody promoting astrotourism of Western Australia. So when you answer that, there's actually another comment which I wanted to read, but go ahead with that question.
Sure. I don't actually have one of wave rock. One of my first trips out in the country with my 12-inch LX200 was to Wave Rock to use my telescope there, but that was before Nightscapes and before digital cameras, and I haven't got back there. It's crazy. So on the list.
Actually, there was another comment by Anna Chan again. It's good to see so many sites to go to around Western Australia. Driving out there is quite a bit of private farmland, which, whilst it's tempting to stop and take a pic, it's actually illegal. And apparently farmers and owners can shoot you if you're trespassing. Is that true?
Well, no, they can't shoot you. We don't legalize murder here. There is that concern, and that is why astrotourism WA to me is so good. And for my workshop participants, it is given that gateway to, I want to go out there. Where am I going to be safe? Where is a safe place for me to do it? Now, you can stop any road. Someone's got a phone.
Somebody's phone's ringing. There we go. I think we fixed it.
Yeah, excellent. So there's nothing illegal about stopping along the road verge in Western Australia, and so you can stop along a road verge, walk right up to the farmer's fence, and take a photo over the fence. You are not allowed to walk into their property, and you shouldn't, because it's agricultural land. It's important that they maintain it to be disease-free and all the rest of it. But in terms of you are in your right to stop along any road. There's a lot of parking areas in Western Australia. Like every few kilometres, there's usually a parking pull-off area, and often they work okay. But even there, I mean, you might have some stranger drive along and take an interest in what you're doing, and you might not want that. And so in those situations, that's just where the astrotourism WA stuff works for me, because I can just look up places which I know those communities want me to come to. But that's also part of why I wanted to get the wheat belt block as well, because I felt if I get this property, I can make it something which really works for astronomers, and maybe take it down the avenue of having people there more often. You know, the shed which we've got there with accommodation, I built that with things like full, as thick as I could get, insulation and block out curtains and, this kind of stuff, so that if an astronomer's there, they can, sleep during the day and, things like that. So I hope to develop that a bit more.
Okay. I think that's gotten all the questions, and I don't know about all of Anak's comment. I mean, I'm sure he's got some others that he'd like to be typing in there real quick, but it's getting to be about time. So we're going to be getting ready to wrap up here. We want to thank you very much for being here with us and sharing with us that night sky. I know it's a lot of fun to take those pictures. I've given the lecture about how to take nightscapes, and we've had various people come on and show us their nightscapes, and yours is quite enjoyable. So thank you very much for being here, Roger, with us. Okay.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay. Terry, you're in charge tonight. Hey, that's cool, because Terry's also in Australia. So Terry, you ready to take us out?
I am.